Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Bryan O'Rourke, and welcome to podcast number 131. Our guest today is Alister Rollins from the UK, founder of Move Technologies, and a friend, original founder of TRP, the Retention People, as well. So before we get to our interview with Alister, I wanted to say thank you to all those that reached out on our last podcast, 130, with Monique, with Eat Love, which was fantastic. A podcast. Really enjoyed that and got a lot of reactions from that one. Also wanted to again remind you listeners that Miami is coming, and we're looking at June 20, I think it's 23rd, for the IHRSA convention. I hope you've registered for the event. It's going to be a great event. I'd love to see you there. So please say hello if you see me, or come to my talk on that Thursday. You can learn more at the link in the show notes below. So as I mentioned, Alister I've known for a number of years. We're going to talk in our interview about digitization in the fitness space, about tech trends, about the future of what that looks like, content, etc. It was a great interview. So without further ado, let's get Alister in on the call. Hello, listeners, and thanks again for joining. As I was mentioning in the intro, Alister has been a friend and colleague for a long time. He's joining us from the UK this afternoon. Alister, how have you been?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Bryan.
I really enjoy spending time talking with you. We were speaking before we got on the podcast today about a lot of different things and what's going on in digital. It's there's so much going on, and there's so many things that are happening. Many things, Alister, that appear to be one thing on the surface and might actually be another thing when you look behind the curtain. Tell me your view of digitization in our space in general. I mean, you've been doing this many years, as I've mentioned in the intro. What do you see happening in digitization of the fitness industry in general right now?
Yeah, interesting. I think it's a very interesting time for us. I think obviously pandemic was a catalyst to a lot of adoption, especially from traditional operators. And yeah, if I think I look at my background, started 20 odd years now in this space and running from a first connected fitness with Fitronics, and then into B2B SaaS with TRP. Then into the first subscription aggregator in the UK with MoveGB, and now with Move Technologies, we've taken that intellectual property and software out and offering it to operators. So through that journey, you're kind of seeing the difference between selling a software package to a fitness operator on a business-to-business contract. Before the days of SaaS, software as a service, we were selling it as literally CD-ROMs, and then went into the cloud and so on, all the way to doing a B2C business with MoveGB. And I see the major difference is the way software is developed. When you're developing it for the consumer, then you really only focus on changing a behavior of a consumer. You set a metric of increasing from sign up to first visit, or increasing from the first time they book a class to the second time they book a class. You want to double the number of people who do that within 7 days. And that type of development means very small iterations of features and colors of buttons, and very tiny things, surprisingly little things can suddenly move the needle massively. Versus when you sell software, because that's how you make your living as a selling software to an operator, then you normally focus on a whole bunch of features, right, and comparing that to other features and so on. So I think how is digitalization going to change? I think the industry will start becoming more aware how important software development for behavior change is versus software development to just tick a box of a feature.
Yeah, I was just on an interview with Cynthia Coopstone for an article and talking about user experience and design and what that means, because people often hear those terms and they think very lofty concepts versus the kind of minutia and detail that it really requires to impact those things that you're describing, because it's not easy to do, is it?
No, exactly. I think like one of the most interesting little developments we did recently was we were trying to increase, it was on a virtual product. So we have an at-home platform that operators can white label and includes a bunch of content. And what we were trying to do is increase the number of people who, after they've watched the first video, would watch a second video within 7 days. And we went through lots of different iterations, both in the user interface and in the messages that follow afterwards. The thing that made the biggest difference, and it was a huge difference, was the email we sent out blurred the workout of the day. So it said, your next workout is ready, click here. And when it was all personalized previously. So we knew they liked yoga, we knew how often they've done the classes before, and we used to send the actual video. But then because we're so focused on trying to move the needle of a behavior, we didn't just stop there that, yeah, we sent the next video to them. We kept iterating. And when we blurred the video so they couldn't see what we've given them, you get more people clicking on it, more people into the interface, then more people, they didn't work out there and then, they favorited it, and then the percentage came back. And we had 5 times the number of people would work out within 7 days than before we blurred that. So tiny little things like that make a huge difference. And I think I don't think our industry's ever really done that from an operator side, because bigger companies like the Pelotons and the Netflix of the world, and they've known this stuff for years, and they've been employing very good product people for a long period of time. And I'm sure a lot of the tech guys in our industry have very good product people as well, but it's focusing on moving the needle, which needs to come from the client, the operator, demanding that's what they want to see, rather than they want to see a list of features.
Yeah, no, that's so important, because to your point, it's just not something that bricks and mortar operators are used to thinking about. All right. I mean, because, if your model is having a great clean gym and having a great front desk and you're selling a membership, the way you look at the interface with the user, the member, is very confined in certain parameters that have absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about, right? I mean, and so so that's where brands really need expertise to help them understand those nuances, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of people use the word partnership often when they're a supplier, but I do think in software in particular, it's really important that it's a partnership. It's not a one-off transaction. It's the consumer expectation of software changes very rapidly, far faster than it ever used to do. With Amazon will release a new feature on their app and on their interface, and suddenly the expectation of the consumer is that every single interface should work in this way because it's so intuitive. So it really is a partnership. And I personally think, and we're experimenting with different models of how do we supply software to the industry, which is more aligned in that partnership. So it's not just a license fee we get paid every month, regardless of how good our software is at helping the business. It's how do we incorporate models? And we haven't cracked it yet, but would love to crack that. I think that's another change in the industry. I think that needs to happen, is a lot more partnership style business models between software providers and the traditional brick and mortar, because ultimately they can't operate without each other either.
No, absolutely true. And so, now coming here, because of, as you mentioned, with Petronix and then with TRP, which is the SaaS solution, and now you're dealing with Move. What led you to start Move? Like you'd exited TRP, and that was 10 years ago almost, correct?
Yeah.
And I remember you from those days. What was the impetus for you to kind of come down this approach to the market? What inspired you to do this?
It's a good question, because ultimately I've spent my entire career working on one problem, which is if the consumer wants to be active their entire life, which everyone does, so the demand for what we do as an industry, which I'm incredibly passionate about, is huge. It's literally everybody. There's no one in any room that wouldn't put up their hand saying they want to remain active until the day they die. But the supply of that demand, which is, our industry, has never cracked that. It's got such high churn, and it's a very difficult business model to really make work over a sustainable point of time. So I first started trying to tackle that, as you mentioned, with Fictronics, which was, ironically, now connected fitness is a very popular thing. It was the first connected fitness. It was plugging into the treadmills and the bikes it was going back to 2001. So I was at university when I started the business, and it was before the days of iPads and the like. So we were actually bolting on IBM point of sale tills, like you see in a bar and a restaurant, onto the front of bikes and treadmills, and working with the guys like Precore and Life Fitness and so on to understand the protocol and gamifying it. And that was a tough slog. That was my first ever business. It was expensive. We had to network the clubs. And I suddenly realized that it wasn't trying to motivate people while they were in the gym. That was a problem. It was trying to motivate people who weren't coming to the gym, who were paying the membership. So that evolved into TRP when we realized all the data was kept within the databases. They have to swipe their card for access control. So unlike the retail industry, you have to come up with clever loyalty schemes to get you to collect the data with loyalty card points. Our industry is very lucky. We force that data collection and visit frequency collection. So we're seeing that data in that database. We then evolved that business. What's now called a pivot. Back then was just do whatever you can to survive. So we iterated that business to become TRP, which was and still is leading data analytics company and loyalty company. Our first product, which was our flagship for a while, was a predictive algorithm calculate how likely members were to cancel before they did. And that was a very fascinating journey, really took off. Obviously, that's where we first met. We're probably going back 15 years ago now, isn't it, Bryan? And that was a successful business, sold that business to Constellation Group, and who I have a lot of respect for. And the journey, I guess, was when I sold that business, we were studying 15 million fitness records. And you could see in the behavior that what was keeping people active, and it's ultimately variety. So I sold the business, and then I did about a year for Constellation. I moved to New York, and then started Move, the subscription aggregator. So the brand in the UK is called Move GB. And that business took off very well. We piloted New York versus Bristol. New York was a struggle. Bristol in the UK just flew. So that business was a subscription, and is a subscription aggregator, but for the purpose of retention. And that business grew very well. During COVID, it got hit relatively hard, but we digitized a lot of the business. And as part of that survival, if you like, for that business, we span out what's now called Move Technologies. Move Technologies is taking a lot of the intellectual property and know-how that we'd spent, got over $15 million on in the B2C side, and white labeling it for operators. And that's really what's brought us to where we are today, and the reason really for bringing it to market.
So in the future, obviously, because of the proliferation of devices and data points and all these things that have happened over the last 15 years since we perhaps had our first cup of coffee together, what do you see as the future? We were talking about some of this as well, which we might get a little into with Web 3.0, but so now, what do you see happening in the future as best practice for brands when we're talking about this kind of merger and experience, omnipresence, personalization, gamification, all these kind of hyper-personalization, all these kind of trends, frictionless commerce, all these things. Where do you see that future continuing to evolve to, and what are the table stakes there for brands?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is the digital ecosystem, or full ecosystem really, not just digital ecosystem, centers around the user. And that's That's the key message, I think, as an industry we want to all buy into, and physical operation is a very key part of that. That's where you've got your community, you've got your relationships, but we have to be aware that the user has many other interactions within fitness and well-being, from various different apps to wearables and so on. So making sure that's all glued together, I think, is key, and that's something that I would like, Move Technology to help with. We do a lot of integrations at the moment. Want to continue that and help operators in this space, and ultimately everyone kind of stick to their core competence, do it very well, and work together under a business model that is aligned to keep the consumer active. And as long as the consumer stays active, the pie gets bigger and bigger, and we should be able to continually reinvest.
Yes.
Or with everybody winning, the consumer staying active, the brick and mortar venues are prospering, and the technology players are prospering by all aligning ourselves together. So I think ensuring the digital ecosystem and partnerships work well together is key.
That makes sense. And it kind of related to that, we were talking about it. So, I hope we can follow this train of thought, because when we talk about the future of digitization, obviously, we know what's happening right now with the platforms like Facebook, the whole thing on data privacy, this kind of new era of who really owns what data and how are they monetizing it. All these different dynamics while you're talking about what the future's needing to be, right? And then you're talking about how can you acquire customers at an economic, in an economical way that makes sense when you have gatekeepers with eyeballs that are continually increasing the cost of acquisition. They're doing a bunch of different things that are making it more challenging in certain respects. And, I know there's a lot to come here, but do you have any thoughts about some of those kind of things, Alister?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's a real problem, like generally, not just in our industry. I think, the gatekeepers of ultimately Google and Meta are the eyeballs of all our consumers are in those platforms, and they know it, and their algorithms optimize it so well that it's very, very expensive to reach them, and very, very competitive. One of the things that we're working on, which is very interesting, is the new bot technology that's in WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. At the moment, you can pull someone into a bot messenger technology, and once they're in there, it's very cost effective to continue talking to them. The open rates are huge compared, like email's pretty much dying. It's very, very hard, as I'm sure most businesses now, to nurture people through email. So what we're finding is actually you can take someone from the paid platforms into a messenger bot that you own and can nurture your potential prospects, and go all the way up the funnel to, it's not just someone ready to join a gym right now, it's someone who might be joining the gym over the course of a year. Right. But nurture them with messaging, content, advice, etc. So when they get to the point where it's relevant for them to purchase a membership, they can move over. So that, I think, is a very exciting new thing that I don't think many of us in the industry are playing with yet. Where we've just started looking at it, and it's very cost-effective method of nurturing.
Yeah.
I think you touched on it there, that one of the challenges, but I think we're probably 5 or 10 years out on this challenge, but I think the consumer will want to have much more control over their data in the future.
Right.
And I think the way to solve that is with decentralization and Web3 technologies. We would love to start investing in that area and being ready for when the consumer and the mass populace really start demanding this, that we can pull them from those technology platforms that are owned by the big tech companies into a technology where their data is owned entirely by them, and they trust that with full transparency and continue interacting with it, but under their complete control. I think that it's needed. I think somebody will bring that technology out. I'd love to be that person, but I think we're probably 5 or 10 years off that being something that's mass adopted.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about that at the IHRSA event in June. That's going to be my talk on Thursday afternoon, is Web 3.0 and the implications of it, because it is a significant matter. When you look at Meta's cost, they've gone up, I think, 60% or more in the last year and a half. And there's all these different dynamics. And I think it's hopefully those technologies will become more and more available, because I think it means that you're going to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say, when it comes to certain brands being able to really serve their clients well and being rewarded for it, versus having an intermediary in the middle charging both sides, for the pleasure of the introduction.
yeah, totally. And I think all brands, the like trust, I think, is such a key word, and all brands need to be so focused on trust. And I believe trust is built up of alignment, autonomy, and transparency. And I think if you can deliver those three things to the consumer and to your potential future members and members, then you develop trust. And I think all brands, whether you're in our industry or anywhere else, will need to start being much more transparent. Transparent not just about what data they have, but how they're making money off that. I'd love to see, every time I click on something, actually, can I find out how much Facebook or Meta have charged for that? That's the information I want to know.
That's right.
And that's because that's my data, and that's me that they're making money from. So I think, I think we're probably a few years out from this, but I'd love to start working on it. And well, I think interestingly, in our industry, could be one of the first to really adapt this, because our data is very deep. It's there's a lot of information there about visit frequency and health and well-being, and it's also very personalized.
Yes.
That we want to keep to ourselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see, and again, I'd love Move to be behind this, some very niche vertical fitness social platform where all the data is in the control of the consumer, and it's linking them to the relevant brands, but under their control, and with full transparency of where those brands are actually monetized.
Yeah, I have a hunch that that's going to come about. It's just a question of how long is it going to take. So given all these dynamics, because you've been on the forefront of technology for almost a couple decades now in the space, the challenges you hear, I hear across the board with brands large and small is, many of them are operating multiple different SaaS platforms. They have a lot of complexity, and what do we do next? I mean, what is your advice for brands in how they think about digitization? I mean, what pearls of wisdom would you impart for our audience on, hey, if you're thinking about technology and you're thinking about digitization, here's what you really need to focus on? What would that be?
I would say that try and really simplify it down, that the technology should be invisible, really. The best technology out there is completely invisible. You shouldn't really need to see it, but it should have a very core purpose. It's very opinionated in what it's doing behind the scenes. And it's a different way of thinking, I guess, is a key thing. You're not it's not like when you buy fitness equipment and it has a bunch of features and it does a certain thing. Like technology is a behavior change, nudging, evolving, ever evolving thing. The mindset needs to change a bit. And then once you've got comfortable with that, say, what is the major first metric I'm going to try and change in my business? What is analyzing all your data? Is it to get someone to visit, increase the percentage of people who visit within their first week of joining? Now, that's a very interesting and very powerful metric. If you can do that, you'll extend length of stay on average by about 3 months. And we spent a lot in the B2C side of MoveGB, we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on just that stat, just continually working through very little changes of color of buttons and nudges and all sorts of things to get there. So I think that's one element. And then I think the second is, I mentioned it before about the partnership side, is see your technology providers as partners, and all of them, like connect them all together. There's lots of different, you've got your, you've got your CRM, you've got your marketing tools, you've got, maybe a wearable, you've got all sorts of players there, and all of them need to and should be working together and integrating together. And again, it's something that we work very hard on within Move to make sure we're fully integrated into all the platforms and all the wearables, and because gluing that together is key.
Yeah.
So I think it's making sure it's a behavior change is what you're trying to do, and that's why you're getting technology. And then secondly is in true partnership with all your technology providers, and force them, if they're not talking to each other, force them as part of your, you're the client, you're paying, to actually talk to each other. And then maybe the third thing is think creatively on business models that express a true partnership, where if they do increase a key metric for you, then there is a revenue share of some sort, or we're very open to exploring those ideas. But I think that would be the third thing, is think a bit more creatively about how you can work with your technology providers.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, particularly your first point. I think a lot of times people become overwhelmed because they try to do too many things instead of prioritizing a couple of fundamental business metrics and working on those well to get your hand. Because if you try to do too much, you're not going to be very successful. So I think a challenge is what you outlined, is discerning what is really essential and why, and what can kind of wait and it's not as important, and how to get there. That's a good point. Another thing I wanted to ask you before we go, one last thing, if you don't mind, because you've been an entrepreneur before entrepreneur was a cool word to use, right? And in the world we see today, in the amount of venture capital that has come into the marketplace in this space, private equity, VC money, otherwise, you successfully exited, businesses, so you know a little bit about this. And listen, I'm a big fan of people that want to innovate and create new things, but the money coming into this stuff, I mean, and the number of businesses that are kind of flying around like bees around the honeypot. Do you think this is sustainable? Or do you think we're going to go through a period of consolidation, or kind of slowing down on the number of VC-fed startups in this space? Because every other day I get somebody reaching out to me and I go, my God, and good for them. I'm not saying anything bad, but my word, the amount of money that has come into this space over the last decade is just astronomical.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And to your point on the before entrepreneur was a buzzword, I was reminiscing the other day because I won an award when I was 21 as a Telegraph Entrepreneur of the Year, and in that article, I say I don't like the word entrepreneur. I prefer businessman. Whereas if you imagine that now is a very it obviously is much more popular these days to be an entrepreneur than it is a businessman. But yeah, so I think there is I think, will it change? I think what will change is the amount of money that's gone in to businesses with unsustainable business models. I think that will change. I think the amount of businesses, and it teaches some entrepreneurs a wrong lesson of growth for growth's sake, which does. The conflict is because the VC model relies on one investment returning the entire fund,
right?
And the other, however many, 90 investments either breaking even or dying, and therefore it's that method of investment and almost gambling does work for them. And well, it'd be interesting to look actually of VC track records over the next 10 years. The other thing, we don't actually get to see how successful they've been on this type of model across the board for about another 10 years. But one thing I've noticed within my peer group is it teaches a wrong, in my view, wrong style of business, because it doesn't give you the discipline of what is an actual good business model and what is sustainable, where you can just reinvest your profits and excess cash flow into new growth rather than pumping yourself full of from other people's money to just get that growth. So yeah, in a way, I hope the amount of money doesn't change. I do think it's quite healthy to have a lot of entrepreneurs and businessmen and people, almost in control of their own destiny and tapping into that passion. I think it's very good for mental health to have a purpose and be driven like that. I just think hopefully you get a bit more diligence on the type of models which are funded to be focused more on sustainable models.
Yeah, less of the sizzle and more of the steak.
A lot more succinctly than I could, yeah.
Yeah, particularly understanding with some of these intermediaries that are VCs and private equity, how they really make their money. Where their agenda is is just to be aware of that, and hopefully with Web 3.0 and some other things in fintech, we'll be disintermediating that space as well. So
that is the other interesting thing. Right? I think when Web3 does get properly adopted, like the businesses in itself, a lot of models will have to change.
Yep.
So I think it's already exponential, the adoption of technology in its broadest sense, and it's just going to continue get faster and faster. And it's it's a world that I personally love, but it's staying on top of it and staying connected to all the relevant developments is key as well.
Yeah, it is. Well, any final thoughts for our listeners? Again, Alister, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. I've enjoyed visiting with you over many, many years, and you're always staying ahead of the curve. Any final thoughts for our listeners about your views on digitization in the space with MoveMGB?
No, I'd just say that I guess we're excited when we're launching in the US. We've got a few clients already in the US. We're coming more predominantly over the next sort of 12 months. So we're very excited to work with more US operators. And yeah, just excited for the future. I think we are in a very great industry. I think everyone in it is super passionate. That's why people are in it. And I think it's a huge industry as well. Wellbeing and health will continue to grow.
Yes.
And we've all just got to work together. Anyone who's passionate provides any type of solution that keeps people active. Let's work together and get the best solution out there for the consumer.
Yeah, well, listen, we'll have your profile and the company and other things in the show notes and the links. Thank you so much for making time on a Friday afternoon. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you soon, Alister.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Videri Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym, Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, brianko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.